I look at letters as shapes. We think of them as the symbols we use to communicate. But when I teach and when I also, for myself, think about letters, I try to tell people that those are shapes. They're triangles, they're circles, squares, and line. And what can we do with those shapes? So for example, if I take a square and I turn it into a parallelogram, how does that affect, say, for example, the letter H? Well, the letter H can slant the way that that parallelogram is slanting. This is how fonts are made, actually. This is how font designers do this. You find certain features, the shape of the letter O, or the insides, the counter spaces, which is the white space inside the letters. Do they always have to be circular on the letter O? Can they be oblong? Can they be egg-shaped? So those negative spaces, I call it negative space, you could call it white space. The white space to me is just important as the dark space or the letter shape itself. The first line, I may write the first line, that second line immediately has to respond to what's happening up above. And especially if the line space, which is the space between each line of words, that I have to think about. I have to think about if I have an ascender, which is part of the letter that comes above the line, what's going to happen when I have an ascender on that second line if I have a descender coming down from the top line. So all of that is composition, it's negative space, it's design, it's all the things I learned as a graphic designer. Thinking about the white space on the page, not necessarily filling everything up, not keeping my margins even. Those sorts of things are what lend to a more dynamic design. Prior to the computer coming out, we had to hand draw all of our fonts. Anything that we had to spec for an ad or a magazine illustration, you had to draw it and then spec the type yourself, draw the type. And I discovered that I really had an affinity for fonts back then. And it wasn't until probably 20 years later in my career that I discovered calligraphy as a fluke. I was getting my hair cut from someone, and she mentioned that there was this man who was teaching a year-long course in calligraphy, and it was all the traditional materials. And I thought, wow, somebody teaches calligraphy for a year, so I'm going to look into this, and that's what I did. I took the year-long course and discovered that back in the day when I was all into handwriting and writing my own fonts and all that, that this totally translated for me. I seemed to understand the letter forms when I took that class, and the first time I made a letter I with a tool that I was given, a strange tool, which is a broad edge nib, I put my head down on my desk and cried. I was so excited about it. Some of the pieces are done very quickly. They're on the fly, but it's on the fly after 30 years of thinking about where to put a letter form. Well, not 30 years of design, but I've been doing calligraphy since 1998. And those on-the-fly movements that I make are done after thousands of movements that I've learned how to throw a flourish or take my brush and skip across the page. And that only comes with practice. When I do some of the things, I pause a lot when I write, and I think about the next letter form. I think about, especially if I'm turning letters, I have to think about that negative space again. So I have to think, okay, I'm going to write this letter here, but then how is that next letter going to respond? And do I want to have, how much space do I need between those letters? So there's still thought involved even in the fast things, but for example, some pieces have to be done where I can't really sketch out the design and then draw in. I have to do every single one, especially if it's a fast gestural piece. I have to do it on good paper because you never know when it's going to turn out right. So there is a piece that took 40 tries on good paper. So I had 39 of them in my drawers after I was done. But I just didn't like the way it was feeling, but it has to happen spontaneously. So it took me 40 tries to get it done. But so that movement looks very easy to somebody that's watching it, but in the hand of, I don't necessarily call myself a master, but I've mastered a certain technique. And in the hand of the master, everything looks really easy, but it's taken, thousands and thousands of tries to get that stroke correct. I just feel like I'm always a beginner. I'm always learning something new. And that's exciting to me because my style, I do have a style, but I always tell myself in my mind when I'm learning something new from a different instructor, how can I make this not look like Julie Wildman's letters? I mean, one thing is nice that you have a style that people look at you for, But my challenge is always like, ooh, there I go again. I'm doing the same thing I usually do, and how can I make my hand do that differently? And for me, that lends freshness to my work. People have called it lively, which is, I have a class called Lively Letters, because people usually describe my work that way. I like my work to be colorful and joyful, and well, sometimes I just use black. I mean, it doesn't always have to be colorful, but I love the idea of always having life in my letter forms. I actually found a whole alphabet up in the Adirondacks one time hiking in pine needles. And I didn't move anything, I just found every letter as it was on the ground. So I just get inspired by letters and things in nature, and whether it's signage or different ways that people make their letters, it inspires me to make my letters in a new way. And I am enthusiastic about what I do. I love it, and I love to pass that on to people. When I'm teaching, I feel like that's where I feel the most alive, when I'm teaching, you know, because I just love sharing, and I love the energy, and I learn from other people. The people I teach are as good or better than me sometimes, and I just learn so much from people. It's a craft that it's not taught in schools anymore, so we have to, everybody travels around, teaches, you learn from other calligraphers just like I've learned, and I'm passing it on now. I love to teach. I love to teach people to see. I feel like when we teach in art, you're teaching people to see a different way, and I'm teaching people to see letter forms in different ways, and I just find that very exciting. I love to pass on the craft.